Welcome to Starbound. My name's Aram, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Freyren and Remeke. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. Professor Astraro closed his eyes at the front of the classroom, his neural interface linking with the 3D solid light projector mounted on the low ceiling. It powered up in anticipation of his first lesson on Death Worlds, beginning, of course, with the top-ranked planet, Earth, and its abundance of lethal zones. The classroom stretched before him in two perfect semicircles, like twin pizza slices with their points meeting at the center where he stood. Row upon row of students filled the ascending tiers, their various forms creating a collection of galactic species. Thick exoskeletons shining bright under the white luminescence, fur-covered beings adjusting their fluffy ears, and gelatinous students maintaining their bipedal shapes through conscious effort. The platform beneath Astraro's feet was a small circle of beige stone, its surface rough and pitted from centuries of use. Deep grooves marked where countless professors had stood before him, each wearing their own patterns into the ancient material. Astraro himself cut an impressive figure, even among the diverse assembly. As a Quar, his exterior was neither scale nor skin, but something far more extraordinary. A shell composed of countless tiny crystals fused together by his species' natural secretions. The crystals reflected light in mesmerizing ways, creating a constantly shifting pattern of colors across his body. Blues melted into greens, which sparkled into golds and purples with each subtle movement. Despite this crystalline armor that made him appear as if carved from living gemstone, beneath lay the same flesh and bone common to most bipedal species. His face, emerging from the glittering carapace, was surprisingly conventional. A smooth, bald head hosting two deep black eyes that, unlike the rest of his body, seemed to absorb all light rather than reflect it. A small mouth sat below a single olfactory opening, while two elongated ears swept back from the sides of his skull like organic antennae, constantly shifting position to catch the slightest sound from his students. The solid light projector activated at once, and suddenly the space above the professor's head bloomed with color. A perfect sphere materialized, rotating slowly on its axis. Earth, rendered in breathtaking high definition. Azure oceans wrapped around continental masses of brown and green, while wisps of white cloud formations drifted across the surface. The image was so precise that students could make out the lights of major cities dotting the night side of the planet, tiny pinpricks of civilization clinging to a world that seemed determined to kill anything that dared to live upon it. Astraro's black eyes surveyed the classroom, not focusing on any individual student, but taking in the collective attention of his pupils. His voice, when it came, was gentle yet serious. Today marks the beginning of our comprehensive study on Death Worlds and their deadliest zones. We shall commence with the most lethal planet currently known to the Galactic Federation, Earth and its 7 deadly continents. The sphere above his head shifted, zooming in on an isolated continent in the southern hemisphere, an island so large it stood alone in the vast blue ocean. We begin with Australia. The continent filled the display space, its rust-red center surrounded by a thin strip of habitable green along the coasts. Astraro began dissecting the continent. Australia is divided into multiple deadly subregions. The interior, the outback, experiences temperature variations that would kill most galactic citizens within a single rotational cycle. Surface temperatures can exceed 50 degrees Celsius during the day, then plummet below freezing at night. The soil itself becomes a cooking surface, while the night brings hypothermic conditions. The projection began cycling through Australia's fauna, each image more horrifying than the last. The biodiversity of lethal organisms defies comprehension. The inland taipan, a serpent whose single bite contains enough neurotoxin to kill 100 adult humans. The Sydney funnel web spider, whose fangs can penetrate fingernails and whose venom causes systemic organ failure. But these pale beside the smaller threats. The image zoomed in to show microscopic detail. The mosquitoes alone carry diseases that have claimed more human lives than their planet's wars. Dengue fever, Ross River virus, Murray Valley encephalitis. The list continues. Parasites that enter through the skin and consume their hosts from within. Jellyfish so venomous that their sting causes cardiac arrest in minutes. The blue-ringed octopus, small enough to hide in a shell, carrying enough venom to paralyze 26 adults. Astraro's voice took on an almost reverent tone. This is the continent that humanity reached last in their conquest of their world. Only a species that had evolved in equally threatening environments, specifically the African continent, which we shall study next, could hope to establish a foothold here. The Galactic Federation has been debating prohibition of civilian travel to Earth based on Australia alone.
That can't be true.
The interruption came from the fourth row. A female Zihar, her red fur decorated with distinctive black spots, leaned forward in her seat, her short snout wrinkled in disbelief.
I'm Kraza from Zihar Prime. We're classified as Death Worlders ourselves, Professor. Our planet has acid rain and carnivorous plants, but what you're describing, I don't think anything with 2 functional brain cells would choose to live in the Earth zone called Australia.
Murmurs of agreement rippled through the classroom. A gelatinous being 2 rows back pulsed in concordance, while a heavily armored insectoid clicked its mandibles in what Astraro recognized as skeptical agreement. Several other students voiced similar doubts. How could anyone willingly live in such a horrible place? Astraro's ears positioned themselves to respond, his mouth opening to address these concerns, when a sound cut through the classroom's ambient noise. It started low, a rumbling from the seat directly beside Kraza, then built into something unmistakable. Laughter. Not the chittering of a Thraxian or the harmonics of a Melodian, but something deeper, richer, and distinctively unnerving. The laughter continued, growing louder, drawing every eye in the classroom to its source. The being in the seat was bipedal, roughly Kraza's height, with what appeared to be sparse fur covering only the top of its head. Its skin was a bronze tone that suggested, perhaps, significant solar exposure, and when it finally stopped laughing, it revealed a dental configuration that several students recognized with a chill as omnivorous, designed for both tearing and grinding. Sorry, mate, the being said, facing Kraza directly. Couldn't help myself. Name's David, and just so happens, I live right there. Kraza's ears perked up suddenly, standing straight like twin antennae detecting danger. Her eyes widened to impossible proportions, the black spots on her red fur seeming to tense. Professor Astraro, meanwhile, stood frozen at the center of the classroom, his crystalline surface flickering through a rapid spectrum of colors, a clear sign of a quar experiencing cognitive dissonance. A human in his classroom. How had he not been informed? But before he could process this impossibility, Kraza shot up from her seat with such force that her chair scraped against the ancient stone floor. A clawed finger, trembling visibly, pointed directly at David.
We don't know each other,
she declared, her voice climbing several octaves.
We're from completely different species. We are not mates, and there is absolutely no mating happening between us.
Her fur stood on end, making her appear twice her normal size.
I don't even know what human mating rituals involve, but whatever they are, we're not doing them!
The classroom fell into stunned silence. The gelatinous being behind Kraza lost cohesion for a moment, briefly resembling a confused puddle before reforming. Even the usually stoic insectoids clicked their mandibles in what could only be described as bewilderment. Professor Estraro's ears swiveled in opposite directions, a sure sign of complete befuddlement. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed, "Miss Kraza, I don't believe anyone suggested—" "Oh, bloody hell," David interrupted, running a hand through his sparse head fur. His face had taken on a reddish hue that several students noted with alarm, wondering if this was some sort of threat display. "Right, cultural misunderstanding here. See, in Australia, mate just means friend, buddy, pal, someone you'd share a beer with, yeah?" He leaned back in his chair, seemingly unbothered by the dozens of eyes, compound, simple, and bioluminescent, fixed upon him. "The Federation translators are rubbish with context. Bet they trained the bloody thing on American English or something. Americans barely speak proper English as it is." He grinned, revealing those omnivorous teeth again. "In the States, they'd probably say buddy or dude or some such nonsense. But knows everyone's a mate. The person who serves you coffee? Mate. Someone you've just met? Mate. Your worst enemy? Probably also mate, just with different inflection." Kraza slowly sank back into her seat, her fur gradually settling.
"So, you weren't claiming me as a potential breeding partner?"
"Oh, no," David laughed. "No offense, but I prefer my partners with a bit less fur and a lot fewer claws. You seem nice enough, but this much fur really ain't my thing." Professor Estraro cleared his throat, a sound like crystals chiming against each other. "Yes, well, perhaps we should return to the matter at hand." His neural implants flickered as he accessed the university's databases, and the solid light projection above shifted from Australia's deadly landscapes to a scrolling list of enrolled students. The list paused, highlighting one entry in particular. He read it, and his confusion turned to dawning comprehension. David Brown. Species: human. Homo sapiens. Planet of origin: Earth. Sol system. Classification pending. Status: first human admitted to Galactic University. The note was there, buried in administrative subtext. The admissions system, unable to process the designation Earth, had automatically filed him under the generic Class G worlder, a catch-all for planets with mildly unusual but non-lethal environments. A catastrophic error, but one that explained the lack of warning protocols. Estraro's ears drooped slightly, his species equivalent of a sigh. "Mr. Brown, you are indeed registered for this course. My apologies for the oversight." The word came out strained, as if the very concept of overlooking a human in his classroom was physically painful. "You truly lived in the Australian death zone." David straightened in his seat, and for the first time, the class got a proper look at their human classmate. His skin showed clear evidence of solar exposure, a darker pigmentation that spoke of evolutionary adaptation to intense radiation. His build was compact but sturdy, muscles visible beneath the standard university jumpsuit that suggested a species evolved for endurance. "Born and raised in Queensland," David said with evident pride. "Little town called Cairns, right on the coast. Went to school in Brisbane, did my OPA there. Been all over Australia really, even did a gap year working at a cout station in the Northern Territory before coming here." The reaction across the classroom was immediate and visceral. In the back rows, a cluster of reptilian students, their scales a deep emerald that marked them as Zorians, fixed their vertical pupils on David with an intensity that would have been predatory if not for the underlying current of fear. Their usually perfectly still forms showed minute tremors, the only sign of their distress. The transparent beings in the middle rows, Vitriolsi, whose translucent bodies revealed every organ, every neural pathway, began a subtle migration. One by one, they shifted seats, moving away from David's position with movements so casual they might have been choreographed. Their internal organs, visible through their glass-like skin, shone with colors that indicated extreme stress. Their three-chambered hearts beat visibly faster, pumping luminescent blood through increasingly constricted vessels. But it was Kraza who surprised everyone. Perhaps it was their shared Deathworlder status, Professor Astraro mused, that gave her the courage. Or perhaps it was simply curiosity overcoming fear. She turned in her seat, studying David with eyes that held equal parts wariness and fascination.
"How is it?"
she asked finally, her voice small.
"Life in Australia, I mean. Is it really as the professor describes?"
David scratched his head, a gesture several students noted in their xenobiology notebooks. Wow, it's not nearly as bad as the professor's making out. I mean, sure, we've got some dangerous animals, but not nearly as bad, Astraro interrupted, his crystalline surface flashing indignantly. Mr. Brown, I assure you that every piece of data I presented was accurate. I have told no lies in this classroom. No, you're right, David said, holding up his hands in what the Universal Cultural Database identified as a placating gesture. The inland taipan is definitely the most venomous land snake, and yeah, the funnel webs are nasty buggers. Box jellies will absolutely kill you, and the heat in the outback can be murder. Literally. He paused, seeming to consider. And the crocodiles, can't forget the crocs, and the sharks, and the spiders that hide in your shoes, and the magpies during swooping season. How can you say it's not that bad? Asked Vitriosi. David's face crunched up, another expression for the xenobiology notes. It's hard to explain. You'd have to visit it yourself to understand. It's not that bad when you know how to live with it, you know? We check our shoes, swim between the flags, don't go walking in long grass, avoid the jellies in stinger season. It's just life. Professor Astraro's ears twitched rapidly. A field trip to a death world would be extraordinarily difficult to arrange. The liability forms alone would require. I'll summon the dean! A Vitriosi in the front row. Birix, known for his exceptional academic performance and equally exceptional anxiety, stood abruptly. His transparent form showed his digestive system had completely shut down in fear. I'll pursue my rights under University Code Section 34.7. No student can be compelled to visit a death world, even for academic purposes. My progenitors would dissolve themselves if they knew I was even considering. Agreed, called out a chorus of voices. The saurians in the back hissed their assent, while the insectoids shook their strange heads together. Professor Astraro turned to David, his colors shifting to what his students recognized as smug satisfaction. You see, they wouldn't even want to visit your world. David laughed again, the sound seeming to bounce off the ancient stone walls. No worries, we don't need to go there physically. He leaned forward, enthusiasm lighting up his features. Earth's got its entire surface virtualized. Same protocols the Federation uses for standard virtue spaces. Full environmental simulation. We could do a full immersion tour of Australia without anyone leaving their seats. The professor's colors shifted through several spectrums as he processed this. The Federation's virtual environment technology is highly restricted. Risk assessments for sharing such technology with Deathworlders are extensive. The bureaucratic process alone takes decades. How could humans possibly? We invented virtual reality centuries ago, David interrupted, and for the first time there was an edge to his voice. His perpetual grin faded slightly. Start with primitive headsets, moved on to neural interfaces. Our version's actually better than galactic standard in some ways. Higher resolution, low latency, more realistic environmental simulation. Astraro's ears went completely still. You use advanced virtualization technology for Deathworlder combat training? What? No! David's grin returned full force. Well, I mean, maybe the military does, but mostly it's for gaming. Entertainment. It's $1 trillion industry back home. People use it to explore fantasy worlds, fight dragons, build civilizations, that sort of thing. He looked around the classroom, noting the mix of fascination and horror on alien faces. Look, I can invite the whole class into a virtue space right now. Perfect replica of Earth, any location you want. Queensland coast, Sydney Harbour, even the outback if you're feeling brave. 100% safe. It's just sensory data. Can't actually hurt you. He paused, then added with a slight smirk. Unless someone's got a reason to refuse. Scared of a bit of virtual reality? The challenge hung in the air. Professor Estraro looked around the classroom, his black eyes seeking any objection. The student's body language screamed reluctance. The Vitriosi had nearly gone invisible with stress. The Zorian scales had locked in defensive positions, and Krasa's claws had extended involuntarily. But no one spoke. To refuse would be to admit cowardice in the face of what was, rationally, no danger at all. Very well, Estraro said finally, his neural implants glowing as he accessed the classroom's administrative controls. I see no formal objections. The solid light projection shifted again, displaying the permission interface. With movements that suggested great reluctance, he added David Brown to the list of students authorized to create fully immersive virtual environments. The effect was immediate. David's grin widened to proportions that several students found distinctly unsettling, revealing more of those omnivorous teeth. He pulled out a device that looked remarkably primitive by galactic standards, a flat rectangle that lit up at his touch. Brilliant, he said, fingers moving across the device in a sequence of quick taps. Just need a sec to sync with your system and… A chime resonated through the classroom, felt as much as heard. Above the professor's head, the solid light projection shimmered and transformed. Where once had been academic data now hung an invitation, rendered in cheerful colors that seemed almost obscene given the context. Welcome to Virtual Australia. David Brown invites you to experience Cairns, Queensland. Accept? The invitation glowed gently, waiting. Around the classroom, students exchanged glances, compound eyes meeting simple ones, bioluminescent organs flashing nervous patterns. They had asked for proof that Earth wasn't as terrible as described. Now they were about to receive it, whether they truly wanted it or not. Professor Estraro's shiny form had settled into a deep blue. Resignation mixed with a degree of curiosity. His ears, for once, were perfectly still. Well then, he said quietly, shall we visit this death world? When he accepted the invitation, the transition was seamless. One moment standing on ancient stone, the next feeling sand beneath his feet. But it was the assault on his senses that made his crystalline form flicker through a rapid spectrum of colors. The sun, Earth's single massive star, blazed overhead with an intensity that made his photosensitive crystals ache. The heat wrapped around him like an invasive living thing, pressing against his shell with oppressive weight. And the gravity. Oh, the gravity. It pressed down on him like an invisible hand, making each movement require conscious effort. His legs, evolved for a world with 60% of Earth's gravitational pull, trembled as they adjusted to the increased load. The beach stretched before him, golden sand meeting impossibly blue water that extended to a horizon that seemed wrong somehow. Too close or too far, his brain struggling to process the alien perspective. Beside him, David materialized with a casual presence that spoke of belonging. The human's feet found purchase in the sand as if greeting an old friend, and his face turned up to the brutal sun with what could only be described as pleasure. Welcome to Cairns, Professor. You picked a great spot to be, right on the edge of the Great Barrier Reef. One by one, the rest of the class began to appear. Krasa was first, her red fur immediately fluffing out in response to the humidity. She stumbled slightly as the gravity hit her, claws extending instinctively to find balance in the shifting sand. The Zorians appeared next, their emerald scales immediately darkening as they absorbed the intense solar radiation. They huddled together, vertical pupils contracting to mere slits against the brightness. The insectoids materialized in a single cluster, their exoskeletons clicking in distress as they felt the weight of Earth's gravity threatening to crack their shells. Last came the Vitriosi, and their appearance drew gasps even from their classmates. The transparent beings, evolved on a world of a red star, seemed to glow in the Earth's sunlight. Their internal organs were illuminated like living stained glass. Byrrix, who had materialized last, immediately cowered, seemingly afraid of his own shadow. A dark outline on the sand, perhaps a kind of biome he had never visited before.
"This is hell,"
gasped Azorian, struggling to lift one leg from the sand.
"The gravity alone. Temperature reading 35 degrees Celsius,"
announced an insectoid, its voice strained through the translator.
"Humidity 87%. Hell indeed."
"It's just a simulation," Professor Astroro reminded them, though his own voice carried a slight tremor. His reflective form was already showing stress fractures. Psychosemantic, he knew, but distressing nonetheless. "Your neural pathways are creating sensory data. You're still safely in the classroom." Kraza had dropped to all fours, finding it easier to distribute her weight.
"Knowing it's fake doesn't make it feel less real,"
she panted, her tongue lolling out in an attempt to cool herself. David looked around at his struggling classmates with growing concern. "Right, okay, maybe I should have eased you into it. Look, let me show you how we live with this place. It's really not that bad once you understand it." His face brightened with sudden inspiration. "Oh, I know. Let's go see some salties." "Salties?" Byrrix whispered, his transparent form trembling. "Saltwater crocodiles. Proper dinosaurs they are. Survived the extinction event that killed the rest. Been around for millions of years." David's enthusiasm seemed genuine, which made it all the more terrifying. "The simulation should have some by the river mouth. Come on, I'll show you they're not as dangerous as you think." The collective reluctance was more than obvious. Several students took involuntary steps backward, which in Earth's gravity resulted in stumbling falls into the sand. Professor Astraro forced himself upright, his sense of responsibility overriding his instincts. "This is a learning opportunity," he said, though the words came out strained. "Mr. Brown is offering to demonstrate human adaptation to their environment. We should observe." With visible reluctance, the class began to follow David along the beach. Each step was a struggle. The Zarians had adopted a low, sliding gait to manage the gravity. The insectoids moved in quick, jerky bursts, pausing frequently to rest. The Vitriosi left strange impressions in the sand, their forms partially melting in the heat before reforming. The sand itself was an enemy. It shifted treacherously underfoot, requiring twice the effort to traverse. Several students discovered that Earth's sand, heated by the sun, could reach temperatures that caused actual pain through their simulated footwear. Byrrix left a trail of stress-induced bioluminescence, his fear liquids literally lighting their path. "There!" David pointed ahead to where a river met the sea, murky brown water mixing with blue. "Should be some sunbaking near the mouth. Big ones too, if the simulation's accurate." At first, none of them could see what he was indicating. The bank seemed empty, just logs and rocks scattered along the waterline. Then one of the logs shifted slightly, and several students emitted sounds their translators couldn't parse. Pure, primal fear. The saltwater crocodile was massive, easily 6 meters long, its armor-plated hide perfectly mimicking the muddy bank. Only when it opened one eye, ancient, cold, calculating, did its true nature become apparent. "Beauty!" David exclaimed. "Now watch this. Classic Aussie education right here." Before anyone could stop him, before anyone could even process what was happening, David sprinted toward the massive reptile. Earth gravity seemed to mean nothing to him as he accelerated across the sand with terrifying speed.
No!
Kraza yelped, but it was too late. David reached the crocodile, slapped it on the head with an open palm, yelled, "Dag, you're it!" and immediately reversed direction, sprinting back toward the group with explosive speed. The crocodile's reaction was instantaneous. The log became a living missile, launching itself forward with a speed that defied its massive size. Jaws capable of generating the highest bite force of any living animal snapped at the air where David had been a fraction of a second before. It pursued him for just a few meters before stopping, apparently deciding the strange biped wasn't worth the effort. David jogged back to the group, grinning and barely winded. "See? Not that dangerous if you're quick. They're ambush predators, not pursuit predators. Just gotta be faster than their initial lunge." The silence that greeted him was profound. Several students had fallen to their knees in the sand, unable to process what they'd witnessed. Others stood frozen, their various physiologies displaying every possible sign of shock.
You struck a predator that could crush you in half,"
whispered Azorian. "Under this gravity, we'd have been eaten," Birix managed, his transparent form flickering between visible spectrums. "None of us could move that fast here. None of us." "Well, yeah," David said, his grin faltering. "But that's why we teach kids young. Steve Irwin used to do this stuff on TV all the time. It's about understanding animal behavior, not—" A third of the class simply vanished. No goodbye, no explanation. They just accessed their neural interfaces and fled the simulation. The beach suddenly seemed much emptier. Professor Astraro watched them go, his colors cycling through resignation. "We cannot force them to stay, Mr. Brown. The psychological stress alone." David's shoulders slumped slightly, but he rallied. "Okay, maybe the croc was too much. How about something smaller? Oh, I know!" He activated his control interface, and the beach shimmered around them. They were suddenly standing in coastal bushland, eucalyptus trees providing blessed shade. Coastal taipan territory. Beautiful snakes, really. Very misunderstood. The remaining Zorians went absolutely still. Their scales, which had been dark for heat absorption, suddenly blazed bright white, a fear response so deep it bypassed conscious thought. Their vertical pupils dilated fully despite the bright sun, and a low hiss emanated from the group.
We must go,"
one managed, backing away from nothing in particular.
"Genetic memory cannot."
As a group, the reptilian students activated their interfaces and disappeared. The simulation flickered as it adjusted to fewer participants. David looked genuinely distressed now.
"But I haven't even shown them one yet. They're really quite shy, actually. You hardly ever see them unless—"
"Mr. Brown," Professor Astraro interrupted gently. "For a species that evolved from reptilian stock, the fear of superior serpentine predators runs deeper than rational thought." Only a handful remained now. The professor, Kraza, and, surprisingly, several of the insectoids who seemed grimly determined to continue. David's expression had shifted from enthusiasm to something approaching desperation. Okay, something really small then, not scary at all." He interacted with the control interface again. The scene shifted to what appeared to be a wooden structure, a shed or outdoor building. "Right, redback spiders. Common as anything, but totally harmless if you just leave them alone." He led the remaining group to a dark corner where wooden beams met. "See, they like dark, undisturbed places, build these messy webs. There!" He pointed to a small black spider with a distinctive red marking on its abdomen. "Redback spider. Venomous? Yeah. Dangerous. Only if you stick your hand in their web. We teach kids to check before reaching into dark spaces. Simple as that. Just leave them alone and the only things they'll harm are tiny insects." The insectoids leaned in closer, their compound eyes focusing on the tiny arachnid. For a moment, it seemed like David had finally found something that wouldn't send his classmates fleeing. Then, one of the insectoids spoke, its voice flat through the translator.
"That is an arachnid." "Well,
Yes, David said hopefully.
A venomous arachnid.
True, but…
No.
The word was final, absolute. The insectoids looked at each other, some form of communication passing between them that bypassed the translators entirely.
We appreciate the educational experience, but no. Simply no.
They vanished as one, leaving only Professor Estraro, Kraza, and David standing in the simulated Australian bush. The silence stretched between them, interrupted only by the simulation's nature sounds. Bird calls that Estraro now recognized as potential warning signals, insect buzzes that could herald deadly stings, even the rustle of leaves that might hide any number of lethal creatures. Finally, Professor Estraro spoke. I believe I understand what you meant, Mr. Brown, about Earth not being that dangerous. His crystalline form had taken on a thoughtful purple hue. You don't see the danger because you've evolved alongside it. These threats are simply part of your existence. David nodded, looking defeated.
It's just home, you know?
Indeed, but consider this. Estraro gestured to where their classmates had been. The Vitriosi evolved on a world where the greatest predator was a slow-moving filter feeder. The Zorians, despite being from a death world themselves, never faced venomous threats. The insectoids come from a hive world where they were the apex species. To them, seeing an insect-eating spider, it's insanity. He paused, organizing his thoughts in the way that made him an effective educator. You slapped a crocodile and ran. To you, this was a demonstration of understanding animal behavior. To them, it was watching someone play with their own life. You pointed out a spider and said, "Just don't touch it." They heard, "This tiny creature could kill me, and it's everywhere." Kraza, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke.
Your world, it's not just dangerous, it's casually dangerous. The danger is so omnipresent you don't even notice it anymore.
David looked between them, processing their words. So, when I say it wasn't that bad, you spoke truth. For a human, Estraro finished. Earth isn't that dangerous. To humans. You've had millions of years to adapt. The rest of us, he gestured to himself and Kraza, we would last days, perhaps hours in some cases. We're not calibrated for your world's specific brand of lethality. The professor's colors shifted to something more businesslike. I think we've learned enough for today. We should return to the classroom and assess the situation. Mr. Brown, Miss Kaza, I may need your assistance in preventing a mass withdrawal from the course, and perhaps crafting a very different lesson plan going forward. They accessed their interfaces together, the deadly beauty of Australia fading around them. The last thing Estraro saw was that red-backed spider, sitting motionless in its web, a tiny killer, perfectly adapted to its environment. The classroom materialized around them, empty. Every seat, save their own, was vacant. The ancient stone bearing witness to what might have been the shortest field trip in Galactic University history. Professor Estraro's colors cycled through several shades of resignation before settling on a deep, contemplative blue. Perhaps, he said quietly, his voice echoing in the empty space. There's a reason we call them death worlds. David and Kraza exchanged glances, the humans still looking somewhat bewildered, the Zihar showing what might have been respect, or perhaps fear. It was hard to tell with all that fur. The lesson was over, and Estraro made a mental note. Next time, start with something less traumatic. Earth was perhaps too much for an opening class.